Years ago, I helped out a cheap retail store with their security. In downtime, I would help stock, but it was also my job to make sure kids weren't messing around with party supplies, people weren't shoplifting, etc. Part of my job at close was to check the shelves and under them in case boxes were misplaced or stocks went missing. Customers would hoard a basket of things to look like they were shopping and then ditch the basket under the shelf and leave with a single object, so this was necessary. I was visiting family for a few days, and I received a text from my manager asking me when I was coming back. I thought it was weird, but I didn't think anything of it, as I would be back the next day. When I arrived back at work, they showed me security tapes. A customer with a bag containing nothing but a sledgehammer walked into the store and then slid himself under the shelf a few hours before close, and then just waited perfectly still. The staff member taking over my close duties did not do a shelf check that day. If I had not decided to take those few days off, and it was a struggle to decide, as I was on minimum wage and needed the money, I would have found myself face to face with a creeper and a sledgehammer. He lay in wait, surprisingly, as the manager stood at the till counting all the cash openly at the counter. The store was locked at the front by now. He continued to just lie there. The employees all left the store from the back warehouse entrance, and that's when the guy came out. He bust down the office door, where the safe was kept. He then tried to use his sledgehammer to literally knock the safe off the bolts in the floor. By this time, the security alarms had been set off from him breaking down the door, and my boss was coming back to the office through the back because he forgot something when they all locked up that day. He came face to face with a man who chased him back outside. My boss hid in some dumpsters, and the man ran into the car park and into the distance with his sledgehammer in tow. After his entire 3 or so hour stakeout in operation, he left with nothing except, I'm assuming, sore arms.
I come from a very remote fishing town in far north Queensland. In the wintertime, we would get tourists in from Victoria, who usually weren't really liked, because some of them would overpopulate the area, shoplift, disturb the peace, destroy property and then brush it off because it's a small town, steal your dogs or fruit off the trees in your backyard, start fights, treat locals poorly, etc. During tourist season, they would bring the obvious caravans, Winnebagos, RVs, camper trailers, and occasionally vans. In my town, vehicles like vans were uncommon because most people had utes, or four-wheelers due to the droughts and floods we had in the area. Just to show how remote our town really is, the closest city is 11 plus hours away, so if you wanted to go shopping for things like pet care products, you had to either order it or drive a long way to buy it. The incident occurred when I was about 10 or 11 years old. I was walking down the street when this big woman in a sun hat and purple shirt pulled up beside me in a van. I looked at her and she said the typical, "Could you help me find my dog?" I just asked, what did it look like? The woman then leaned over the seats and opened up the passenger's door, where she appeared to have made this over-the-top display of a dog lead and heaps of dog toys piled on the seat, most of them with the tags still on. The woman asked me to hop in, so she could, quote, use my eyes. I said I couldn't get into cars with strangers. Then she claimed to know my dad. My dad left us months before, so this was the absolute least convincing way she could have lured me in. I still said no. Then she started getting hostile, swearing at me and telling me to get in or I'd be in trouble and so on. I immediately ran away and didn't mention anything about it. However, a week later at my school, a mind-blowing 40 students from grade 1 to 7 had a meeting with our town's only police officer, where apparently there were 2 other incidents both mentioning the van. While one mentioned there was only a woman, but others mentioning both a woman and a man. We were told the usual, don't get into cars with strangers, and to stay in groups. Thinking back now, there were other details such as the way the woman smelled. It wasn't bad breath or BO. It was something on her that I couldn't explain, like a mix of an old soap and something rotten. While there could have been someone lurking behind the seats, the thing with really small towns is, everyone is cautious of strangers. I think that's the only reason none of the children would go in. Since moving into the city, I've seen children just walk out of their yard without their parents' permission and follow me up the street just to pat my dog. Other children trying to ask me for a ride because they're too lazy to walk home. I could have easily just taken them away. These stories seem like a common theme in this sub. It's rather creepy how common this occurrence is all over the world. Also, I'm aware kidnapping of any kind is bad, but I find it worse when it's a couple, being most of the time a woman and a man, where the woman helps kidnap children for usually sexual reasons to make the guy stay. I don't know how their brains could get so warped to the point where they think that's a good idea. Stay off the streets late at night, no matter how safe your neighborhood may seem.
I'm a 19-year-old male. To give some backstory here, this is my mother's story. However, I was with her during this story, but I was only 3, therefore I remember this slightly, but I'm going to tell it from my mother's point of view anyway. To give you an idea of the layout of our house and garden, the living room has multiple windows that directly look out onto the back garden. There's a big gate in our driveway to stop anyone getting in. Next to the living room is the kitchen, which also has more windows, but also the back door. This will be relevant to the story. Okay, so my mother was completing the household chores, as she does every day. I was sitting in the living room, watching television on the sofa, with my back to the living room windows. All of a sudden, I see a figure reflecting off of the picture frame, hanging on the wall opposite to the window. I ask my mum if Dad is back from work, to which she says no. I'll never ever forget the look of horror on her face when I told her that yes he was, he's in the garden. She looked outside the window and almost had a heart attack when she saw a scruffy looking but fairly built man outside the living room window. This didn't seem to faze him at all though. He psychotically smiled at my mother through the glass, and my mum asked him what he was doing on our property. He said nothing, with the same sadistic smirk on his face. She said she was going to call the police, and what he said is one of the scariest things I've ever heard. He screamed at my mother through the glass that if she even got her phone out, he would break the glass and kidnap me. My mother was terrified. She wanted to protect me by calling the police, but she also didn't want him to hurt me if she did try to call them. As soon as he saw that she was terrified, he ran for the back door. Luckily, it was locked because my mum has always been a paranoid person, so she always locks the doors. He screamed at her to let him in, or if she didn't, he'd find a way in and kill us both. My mother told him to fuck off, which enraged him, and he pulled out a pocket knife and began bashing hard against the windows. I was still oblivious to what was happening, as I just thought it was my dad, only being 3 years old. My mum frantically grabbed me, and I don't mean picked up. She literally grabbed me off the sofa and booked it upstairs. We were backing up in the upstairs hallway, looking for anywhere to hide, when my mum's younger brother popped out of his room with his headphones on. My mum didn't even realise he was home, and he clearly didn't hear the commotion downstairs because of his headphones. My uncle was 25 at the time and was really well built. He intimidated a lot of people. My mum cried and told him that there's a guy who's trying to break in. While she's telling him this, that creepy lunatic screamed from downstairs that he was in the house. He said that cynically, "Boogeyman is coming to get you," which really freaked me out. It freaked me out so much that I actually remember that to this day. Anyway, since the guy didn't know my uncle was home, he kept yelling and telling us to come out, and that it won't be painful. My uncle told us to lock ourselves in the bathroom and call the police. We did, and after 5 minutes of groaning and blatant violence downstairs, The police stormed in and found the guy bloodied and my uncle on top of him, beating him mercilessly. My uncle really didn't hold back. Turns out that he was a known paedophile, which is why he was watching me for so long while I was watching TV. After that day, my mum was terrified to be alone at the house. I loved it as a child because I found the running and the hiding fun, obviously because I was only 3. I can never thank my uncle enough for being there at the right time, when my mother clearly forgot that he was still home. It honestly gives me chills, wondering what he would have done to me and my mother if my uncle wasn't home.
This happened December 2014. I attend a public university in upstate New York. The tuition was cheap, but room and board was expensive. So my boyfriend and his best friend and I decided to rent a small house because it would be so much cheaper. It was our senior year and we were starting to realize how much debt we'd be in when we graduated. So we decided this would save money. And it did. Anyways, Max, my boyfriend's best friend, is gay. And he would often have guys or girls sleeping over. He had lots of gay guy friends and some girls as well that would crash on our couch. At first I didn't know who they were, but after a while I became well acquainted with all of his friends. So one night I went out with a couple of friends. Max and my boyfriend John said they were just going to invite a couple of friends over and play video games or whatever. Sometimes their friends would get a little buzzed and just spend the night instead of driving home. So I was expecting this to happen. I was planning on coming home around 11, but I lost track of time and didn't get home until 2 a.m. I entered our house through the back door quietly. It was dark, so I used the flashlight on my phone. I walked into the kitchen, and as I turned the corner, I was startled to see a man standing in the corner eating some cookies I had made. I jumped and then laughed at myself for getting scared. "Are you a friend of Max?" There was a pause for maybe 10 seconds, then he finally answered. "Yeah." "Oh, okay. I'm Emily. It's nice to meet you." He didn't answer. He didn't smile. He just stared back at me like if I was some kind of alien. I grabbed my water bottle, smiled at him, then made my way into the living room to go upstairs. He smiled at me, but it was a quick smile that lasted about 3 seconds. His smile made my heart start racing, and not in a good way. As I made my way into the living room, I noticed there wasn't any blankets on the couch, which was odd, but I figured maybe he was sleeping in Max's room and just came down for a snack. I went upstairs and into the bathroom. As I got out, I saw the guy from downstairs entering Max's room and quietly shutting the door. I whispered goodnight. He looked up at me and smiled. This wasn't a nice smile. It sent shivers down my spine. His smile was wide, freakishly wide, and he then stuck his tongue out and wiggled it really fast as he closed the door. He double locked the door, which made me feel uneasy. Everything about this guy creeped me out. The way he looked at me like if he wanted to eat me or something. How long and pointy his tongue was. How huge and black his eyes were. As silly as it sounds, part of me felt like he wasn't human. That's how creepy he looked and acted. I'm always being told I worry too much, so I just let it go. The next morning I woke up late, like 10 a.m. Max and John were watching TV when I went downstairs. "So how was your night?" I asked. "Meh. You didn't miss much," Max answered. Then I proceeded to tell him about my night. Then I said, "Your friend scared me so bad when I came home last night, Max." "Which friend?" he asked. "I don't know. I've never met him and he didn't tell me his name, but he was creepy." Now both my boyfriend and Max shared a look, then looked at me like I was crazy. "Emily, what the hell are you talking about? You know all my friends." "Well, apparently not," I laughed. He had long red hair and a beard I've never seen before. The room went quiet for a while and I started feeling confused. Max. He was in your room. How do you not know him? Max started panicking. For some reason, I had a hard time understanding why this was a big deal. I told them what happened, and then they explained to me that no one with that description was at the party, and they didn't know anyone that fit that description. I started freaking out as I realized that was an intruder. I talked to an intruder. I watched him walk into the room of my friend. I smiled at him, and he smiled back. We called the police. I gave them a description of the guy, and we looked to see if anything was missing. Nothing was. The police checked the entire house to see where he might have entered. We had no idea. All the doors and windows were locked. The police never found him, and I never saw him again. The police suspected it wasn't his first time in the house, based on how comfortable he was. Needless to say, I never felt comfortable in that house again. I refused to be left alone in the house, and I would check 3 to 5 times a day to make sure all the doors and windows were locked. I started losing sleep. I lost weight and my hair started to thin out, and I went from being a straight A student to getting B's and C's. So we moved into a 2-bedroom apartment for our last semester. I'm curious what this man wanted. What did he want, and more importantly, what did he do in Max's room? Thing that bugs me the most though is that we have no idea how he got into our house. There's no way he got through the window, cause it would be impossible for him to lock the window from the outside. The front door was double locked with a chain, so he could not have used that door, and the back door was double locked, which would be impossible to do from outside unless he had a key. That was the worst thing I've ever gone through. I feel like I should have known something was wrong, but I'm constantly freaking out over little things, so I pushed my feelings aside. Anyways, I never want to meet that guy again.
I'm a youngish girl living in Southern California, along the coast. And every day I usually take my 2 kids for a 3-mile walk along the beach and back, sometimes making a detour to get coffee. This was a moderately windy day, and my dress was kind of fluttering all around, so about a mile into our walk, we decided to take a right and cross back ahead a couple of blocks, inland, and grab an iced coffee. As I'm walking across the street with my kids, both toddlers, one in a stroller and one walking, an older lady comes from behind me and says, "Do not look right now, just keep crossing the street. But I want you to know that there's a man following you, taking photos of you, and he has been for at least half a mile along, enter street's name. He's been driving about 2 miles an hour behind you as you walk." At first I thought it was some kind of mistake, or that maybe the lady was crazy or something. There's plenty of young girls who jog up and down my street in sports bras and underwear basically. So why would someone bother following me, a mom with 2 kids on a stroll, in broad daylight? We cross and continue walking for a second up the street, and I can't help but look and try to see if that lady is losing her mind, or if she's right. And sure enough, a middle-aged bald man in a tiny black smart car has now turned the same corner as us and is driving, like she said, about 2 miles an hour behind me, with a telescopic lens, the kind you see at sporting events, pointed directly at me and my kids. Instant adrenaline rush. I looked him dead in the eyes, and he moved his camera so I could see his face, and looked right at me. Then moved his head back behind the small piece of frame that holds the window, so his face was hidden, and continues to point the camera directly at me, presumably taking photos of me, or even worse, my small children. I wanted to take a picture of this car, but this is the one day I left my phone at home to charge. I rush my kids into the small coffee shop on the corner, and the lady tells me to go inside and call someone for help, while she waits and makes sure he's gone when we leave. I immediately called my husband on the coffee shop phone and started crying. Not sure why I was so flushed with emotion, but all I can say is I felt so violated. and scared as heck that someone wanted to hurt my kids or me. He was stuck at work 20 miles away, so I kept trying other friends to come help me. Trying to remember people's numbers when you need them is so hard in this day and age, when everything is just one click away. The lady, who I am so grateful for, waited 15 minutes outside the shop while the guy just sat in his car waiting for me to leave. She stared right at him and he didn't move for all that time. That part really freaks me out, because it was obvious that he knew that we knew he was waiting, but he was so brazen that he didn't even care. After the 15-minute period, he did leave, and I was able to get a hold of my dad to come pick us up and drive around for a while, in case he was somehow following us, and would see where I lived, which was just 2 blocks south. I called the police to make a report, and the lady who answered the non-emergency line kind of brushed me off, because I didn't have a license plate number. So I have no idea if they even followed up on it. 2 lessons I learned that day. Don't ever leave the house with my kids without a charged phone. And I am so much more aware of my surroundings now. To think he followed me for that long and I didn't notice. And it took so long for anyone to tell me. I felt so dumb.
When I was researching the deep web, I was browsing for videos that would give me content to write about. It was an unenjoyable experience, just like this whole endeavor has been. Paying to watch these streams makes me feel horrible about myself. Now, it was a Wednesday, early in the morning, so not many streams were available, maybe about 4. But one was quite a bit more popular amongst the others, with about 400 people already queued to watch. The title was Sleeper Slaying, Brutal, High Quality. The number ticked from 414, then to 416. There was no maximum number, simply a growing count of viewers. The timer was at 7:20, so the stream was about to start. It sure was pricey though, 0.75 bitcoins to enter. I had 2 bitcoins in my wallet, so I decided to buy into the show. The first difference was that this was the first of 2 showings I had viewed so far that had a chat. People of different languages were speaking in the chat. Only a few tidbits of English could be made out, usually just referring to their excitement for the show. The buffer had taken about 6 minutes, so there was only about a minute of chat to watch when the timer hit 0. The blurry gray screen turned to color. Slowly, a pixelated image came into view, and my heart froze in terror at what was on the screen. A child was asleep in her bed. A window to her left had moonlight streaking over her harmless body. The sheets covering her small figure had a neat pattern of pink and blue. It was just a sight you can't forget. I didn't take notes to recall it in such detail. The video was high quality, which is what I'm assuming is something that attracts viewers. It was like a 1080p setting on a YouTube video. A terrible analogy to make, but it's one that gets the point across. The camera seemed to be stationary, and from a small ballet figurine that was next to the lens, I'm assuming the camera was placed on top of some sort of dresser, facing the innocent child. After about 20 minutes of still silence, a figure next to the bed slowly stood, towering over the defenseless child. The figure that still haunts my nightmares. That nearly prompted me to turn my discoveries over to the police in an effort to stop these monstrosities. The man was dressed in a black drape, almost like a robe of some sorts, but tied close to his body. It's hard to explain. It looked very odd. Might have just been the camera angle. He was wearing some sort of mask, hard to make out in the dark. It looked like some sort of animal, like a pig-type mask you find in a Halloween store. The man looked towards the camera and did a small wave of his hands. He reached under his garbs and produced a small strip of what looked like cloth and a curved knife, like a small sickle. He pulled the cloth tight between both hands and then quickly wrapped it around the child's head. He did it with such speed, like a practice. The child began to stir, but it was too late. The looming figure repeatedly slashed the child's face, the soft sound of ripping flesh just barely audible from the camera's position. As blood projected onto the walls, onto the man's garb, onto the child's sheets that were supposed to protect her from scary things of the night. I didn't gag. I didn't close my laptop and vow never to return to the deep web again. I just sat there. The rest of this was sort of a blur to me. The man repeatedly slashed the child's face and then proceeded to what I assume was sodomize the face of the body, then quickly saunter back to the camera, where he did something that, even though I was still in shock, I will never forget. He lifted the bottom of his mask, revealing a deathly pale mouth stuck in a wide grin. With that, the stream stopped, and I was returned to the main page of the site.
We were 16, an age where you feel invincible. It was summer and school was out. My friend and I, who lived in the same apartment complex, decided to go to the mall and kill time, as any other teenager would do. I don't remember much about that day, aside from our walk home from the mall. It must have been around 9 when we left, since that's when the mall closes. Our apartment building was 2 miles away, so of course we walked. It was hot out, and we both knew once we got home there would be nothing to do, so we opted to take the long walk. We enjoyed the conversation and the passing of time. Our town wasn't exactly dangerous. Of course there were muggings and theft, but it wasn't as bad as other cities in our county, where rape and unsolved murders were commonplace. So we walked those 2 miles, oblivious to any potential threats. We were a mile in when we passed an intersection. Shortly thereafter, 3 males walked out of the opposite street and began walking behind us. I didn't think much of it. It's summer. They were young. It's hot. No reason to be suspicious. My friend, however, was unnerved. "Hey." "Yeah?" "Those guys behind us." "What about them?" "I'm pretty sure they're following us." "What?" "No, I don't think so. You're just being paranoid." As soon as I'd said that, one of the men started whistling at us. I turned around. "What you got in that bag?" We had shopping bags from the mall. "Nothing. Leave us the hell alone," my friend retorted. I remember being pissed. Why would she respond to them? At this point, I'm nervous as hell. Turns out my friend was right. Call it intuition. We begin walking faster now that we sense danger, and as we quicken our pace, so do the men. They know we're onto them. We get near a plaza with a Del Taco, and as we enter the parking lot, the men disperse. One is directly behind us, and the other 2 are on our sides. I turn around. They all whip out metal baseball bats out of nowhere. At this point, I turn to my friend and we hightail it to the Del Taco, not bothering to turn around. Thank God it wasn't too late or they'd be closed, and we'd have nowhere to hide. As soon as we enter the Del Taco, we look out the windows and witness all the men jumping into a Cadillac Escalade that was parked. Were they only trying to scare us? Why the bats? Why the car? What the hell is going on? We watch as the car drives away. That doesn't quell our fear. We spend about 10 minutes in the restaurant deciding what to do next. Do I call my dad to pick us up? Or do I walk the half a mile home? We didn't want to worry our parents, and so, for some incomprehensible reason, we decided to finish the walk. The whole time we were constantly turning back, anticipating a black Escalade to pop out of nowhere and kidnap us. Thankfully, it never did. As soon as we get home, we promise ourselves not to tell our parents, as it would hinder us from hanging out again. The moment I walked through the door, I blabbed to my parents. I later found out that my friend did the same. Scariest experience of my young life.
This is my sister's story, which she is happy for me to share, and took place 3 years ago on New Year's Eve. My sister is a student in South London and has lived in some pretty awful student accommodation during her time studying. This particular house she lived in had trouble with the front door lock and was just off a very busy main road. She had 4 other housemates, and her room was in the attic, which is obviously the setup for all creepy happenings, but in reality was a really nice conversion. On this particular evening, she was planning on heading out later on to celebrate New Year's Eve locally with her friends. She was in the house alone while she got ready and had left her room to put her makeup on in the bathroom. While she was doing this, she heard a really loud knock on the front door and some scuffling outside. Assuming it was one of her housemates coming back to grab something they'd forgotten, she headed downstairs to let them in. As she got close to the door, she heard voices she didn't recognize and could see the shapes of 2 people through the frosted glass. We've lived in London all our lives and are both probably quick not to trust a situation, so she kept quiet and slowly made her way back upstairs. When the front door literally flies open with a huge bang and a man and woman come flying in. She could smell alcohol on these 2 from a floor up, and from the way they were talking, she could tell they were totally off their faces on a shit ton of drugs too. As they immediately start to force entry into the first bedroom on the ground floor and grab anything they can find, my sister in a panic makes a dash up the staircase to the attic room to stay out of their way and out of sight until she can figure out what to do next. In her room, she finds her phone and immediately calls the police. She has to tell the operator what is going on as quietly as possible and is told that the police will be there in 12 minutes. She told me that this 12 minutes was the longest and most terrifying 12 minutes of her life, as she hears the banging and smashing noises from downstairs starting to move up the house. It is, of course, at this moment that she remembers the staircase which leads up to the attic is still down, as she hadn't had time to pull it up behind her in her frenzied dash to her room. To counter this frankly appalling realization, she moves every item of furniture over the trapdoor and then sits on top of it all to stop them gaining entry if they try. As she sits there, too terrified to even breathe and her heartbeat racing in her ears, she hears them kick down the very last door in the house, right next to her staircase. The woman is screaming and smashing things up, and the man is shouting instructions about what items to steal. These total dickheads are so confident and off their faces, they don't even bother to keep quiet, which makes them so much scarier. She hasn't got a doubt that if a person confronted them or they found someone in the house, they would become very violent. As it becomes obvious to both them and her that the last place to try is her room, she hears the most beautiful sound anyone has ever heard, as the yell of police echoes up the stairs. These 2 fuckers might have been out of it, but they know what this means. The guy just clean jumps out of the 2nd floor window, lands on the shed and escapes over the garden fence. But the woman can't figure out which way to run and is caught by the police, screaming, biting, scratching and swearing. My sister, sitting on top of the chest of drawers over her trapdoor, in exactly the same position she had been in for those seemingly never-ending 12 minutes, can only bring herself to open the trapdoor once the police tell her over and over again that it's safe to do so. The devastation of the house is shocking and makes her so grateful that she had a place to hide, but also compounds how terrifying it was to have to sit helpless and trapped in the attic as these people violently tore apart every room in the house, systematically making their way closer and closer to her hiding place. She speaks to the police, gives her statement, and then calls my mum in a total wreck. She goes to stay with my mum and little sister for a few days while it's sorted out, then moves in with her boyfriend, who is also a student at the same uni. She only returns to collect her stuff, which is at least still around. Everyone else, door locked or unlocked, had their valuables stolen. This story strikes me with total dread, and is probably one of the scariest things I've heard. Imagining what it must have been like for her makes me feel sick. The man never got caught, and the landlord, who never fixed their front door lock before the break-in after being repeatedly asked, tried to make my sister keep paying rent after she moved out, as per the contract agreement. Well, fuck that. She gave him an elaborate array of places he could shove his contract, and I'm pleased to report he must have chosen one of them, because that was the end of that.
Growing up, I lived in a small town in a heavily forested area. In around 2nd grade, my best friend, who shall be known as Celia, began complaining to me about very strange things happening in her household. The first thing she pointed out to me was a smallish hole that was forming in the walls of her unfinished basement. The walls are made of a sort of brick or cinder block material, and the hole was forming in the mortar but expanding as if the bricks were crumbling. I remember asking Celia if her parents knew about this, and she said they weren't worried. Fast forward some odd years, and around 4th or 5th grade, the hole had only become larger over the years, and we would now fit a great deal of our arms into the hole. As far as my arm would go, we could not feel the end of the hole and could not explain why it would corrode deeper into the house, but not get much bigger in girth. At this point, Celia also began telling me she could hear voices from her basement, and that she believed most of it was coming from the hole. I never heard any of these sounds when I would visit her house, but considering we were only 10 years old when this happened, I totally believed her. We frequently had sleepovers on weekends, which is why I was usually exposed to all of the creepy things wrong with her house. Her family was kind of strange in the fact that they had an abnormal amount of animals. They had at least 6 cats and dogs, a few rabbits, birds, lizards, snails, frogs, fish, etc. Around the time when she was hearing the voices, we began noticing that her cats and dogs would randomly disappear and be found later in the basement, standing right in front of the hole. In all the years I knew her and her animals, they had never liked to be in the basement. It started to really scare us, and she was telling me that she believed there was something living in the walls that could move around her house, but the hole was one of their ways out. At this point in time, I believed her, but had never really seen enough proof to be scared as she was. In school, she spent most of her time in anxious wreck, and the teachers and other classmates were really worried for her. It really seemed to me like her parents just didn't care or believe her. A lot of adults believe she was only anxious because of her much older sister having left for college. Now, here's where we get to the really terrifying part. I was sleeping over at her house during the weekend of a Christmas holiday. A slight note about Celia's room is that she has a huge collection of stuffed animals of all sizes, clearly because of her family's love of animals. Anyways, the first night we were sleeping in her bed that night, and when we woke up the next morning, we immediately saw that every stuffed animal was nearly arranged in a pile of about 4 feet high. All the animals were facing us and staring right at us. I don't believe now, and didn't at the time either, that someone or Celia could have moved all those toys. I have always been an extremely light sleeper, and some of the animals were on top of a very large wardrobe. We both knew that whatever Celia believed to be living in the walls had to have been responsible for this. We put back all the animals very carefully and never told her parents. I sort of wished we had now. Since I was staying the entire weekend, we went again to sleep that night in her bed. We woke up around the same time when it was still dark out. It must have still been nighttime. We heard a very low creaking noise that was coming from underneath us. We both knew it was the wooden floors under her bed, just like in a textbook horror movie, and probably because we were only 10, we thought it was a good idea to lean over the edge of the bed and look under. Right as we looked, we saw and heard one floorboard slam back onto the ground. We shot our heads back up and held each other and cried. I have never been so scared in my life, and called my parents the next morning to take me home right away. I refused to go back to Celia's house in fear that she only got worse at school and home. I don't remember if I ever continued to ask her about the things in her house. Maybe I didn't because I was too scared and we were just so young. For unrelated circumstances, my family moved far away from that town that summer. I had only seen her twice after that, and that was over a decade ago. I have never heard from her since, but have always wondered whatever happened, as I know her family still lives in that house today.
This happened when I was about 7 years old in the 90s. I'm a guy to clarify. I had made a new friend who was a bit odd. Like, he would eat a live worm and chew on it, then open his mouth and show it wiggling about in pieces, and then he ate it. Or remove snail shells without killing it. Or eating the dehydrated flavoring from ramen noodle packets and saying it's spaceman food. I invited him over my house to see my room and what stuff I had. But then he wanted to take me to his place. So I said I would get changed because it's really hot. Back then, I had a weird habit of wearing swimming trunks when it was hot. I guess it felt cooler than wearing shorts to me, although I didn't wear underwear because I figured you don't wear underwear when you go swimming, so you don't wear them any other time you wore swimming trunks either. My friend noticed I was wearing swimming trunks and asked me why, and I explained. I also said I wasn't wearing any underwear because I thought it was funny. He looked shocked and wanted to know why. I explained and he looked at me like I told him my dad was Hulk Hogan or something. And he wouldn't drop it the whole time we walked to his place. When we arrived, the house looked normal enough until we went inside. The smell hit me immediately. That stale, damp smell, combined with dog piss and shit. I also noticed that there was no carpets, and the floorboards were rotten. We head into the living room, and it's full of people. 5 or so teenagers much older than us. I'm guessing his siblings, and I'm guessing their mother, who was sat in the corner knitting. She was probably in her 50s. My friend introduced me, and everyone kind of nodded in my direction. I noticed a girl trying to stuff a handful of cigarettes into her mouth, and one of the boys lit them for her, and everyone was laughing when she choked after one puff. I was in shock because I was raised knowing kids are not allowed to smoke. So I immediately looked over to the mother to see her reaction. But she didn't even react. Just kept knitting while looking down. My friend then announces that I'm not wearing any underwear, and the eldest boy, I'm guessing between 13 and 16, explodes with shock and excitement and says, "What? Show me!" I got scared and said that I am wearing underwear, hoping they'd drop it, but they all got interested and cornered me and kept telling me to just pull them down so we can see. And I said I want to go home, but they said no. I can't go until I show them. And he pulls out his Swiss Army knife and had this grin on his face. I looked at their mother thinking, isn't she going to tell them to stop? But she just kept knitting. My friend was supporting them, so I realized I had to rely on myself to get out of this situation. I looked around for a way to escape. One of them was blocking the door we came in. But I saw there was another door leading further into the house, so I darted for it before anyone could get in front of it, hoping I'd find a back door. Thankfully I did, and it was unlocked, and I exploded out of it. And they had a dog there that started barking at me, so I ran to the short chain-linked fence and pretty much leaped over it with all the adrenaline going through me, and looked back, but none of them were chasing me. I got home and was still hyped up, but thought I best not let my mom know what went on. I never spoke to my friend or saw him after that.
So before I begin, perhaps a bit of background information would help you better understand my story. I am now a 20-year-old male living in the Netherlands, and I've been a geek all my life. Games in particular have always played a major role in my life, starting when I got my first PlayStation when I was around 5 years old. Something about gaming just always got me, be it mechanically or terms of storytelling. I could always find something to love about it. As I grew older, I got more and more into RPGs, and eventually found myself on World of Warcraft. As I got more involved in the game, I started joining raiding guilds. For those of you who don't know, it's basically a group of players who intend on facing the game's hardest content as a team. The second guild I joined was the greatest team of people I had met thus far. One of these people was a Swedish girl who was around my age, named Maggie. We got along quite nicely. As it turned out, her mom, who was also in this guild, was actually living in the Netherlands. So we would often end up in conversations where she asked me to teach her some Dutch, and she would teach me some Swedish in return. It was all in good fun. Fast forward to the beginning of 2013, the aforementioned guild had fallen apart a while back, and I had joined a new one. I stayed in touch with some people in the old guild, but Maggie hadn't really been online all that much. When she did get back online, we quickly caught up. It turned out that she actually moved in with her mother and had spent the last couple of months improving her Dutch and attending high school. She also started dating a guy named William, who was actually part of the same guild I had met Maggie in. He always struck me as a nice guy. Other guild members always thought he was a bit direct and perhaps a bit rude, but being Dutch, I understood. That's simply how our culture works, so I was always okay with it. June comes around, and me and Maggie recently finished our final exams and were waiting for the results to come back in. One afternoon, while we were playing online, I suggested a meetup between the two of us. I really didn't have much to do, and given that she had voiced her concerns about finding her footing in Dutch social circles, I figured this would be a nice opportunity to take her first baby steps into the country. She excitedly agreed and asked if she could bring William along as well. Obviously, I said yes, seeing as he was her boyfriend. Meetups are safer when you arrive as a couple, and meeting former guild members was something I looked forward to anyway. A couple of days later, I met them both in Rotterdam, and we had a great day. I showed them around the city since I knew it best. We had some nice conversations, a few laughs, and we ended the day by taking a trip to the Euromast. Before leaving, Maggie had to use the restroom, so me and William were waiting outside. Striking conversation, I said to him, "You two make a nice couple." "Thanks," he replied. "I freaking love her, you know. Honestly, I wouldn't know what to do without her at this stage." Back then, I didn't think much of that statement. It's just a thing that people say when they're in love, so kudos to him, right? Maggie got out of the restroom and we said our goodbyes and parted ways. A few weeks later, we got our exam scores back. I passed high school with flying colors. Maggie wasn't so lucky. She had failed most of her exams. She told me she was going to be studying for the rest of the summer in order to properly prepare herself for the rerun of the last year of high school. I told her if she needed any help, I was willing to see what I could do. Even when I was going to college, she was very thankful and assured me that she would let me know if she needed any help. Fast forward again to September. After our last conversation, Maggie had practically disappeared off the internet. She hadn't logged into World of Warcraft, she was never on Skype, and wasn't even on Facebook anymore. I asked William in mid-August how she was doing, and he assured me that she was fine, so I thought nothing of it. I even admired her focus on her education. However, during my second week in college, all that changed. I got into the metro and picked up a free newspaper in the seat next to me to pass the time. I vividly remember turning the fourth page to read the headline, "Swedish woman 19 from city, stabbed in own backyard." It took me a few seconds to even realize that she lived in the city now, and that she was 19. Even though the article didn't mention a name, I grew very concerned. I quickly sent her a text message, as we had exchanged phone numbers when we met up, asking her if she was okay. The rest of the day went by, and I heard nothing from Maggie. I figured that if something did happen to her, people would have most likely started posting things on her Facebook. Concerned and scared of what I was going to find, I started typing her name in the search bar of Facebook. Sure enough, it was already filling up with messages from people who have heard that she passed away from her injuries. After inquiring with some of the other former guild members, it turned out that William had stabbed her. She had broken up with him after she got her horrendous test results. He wasn't all too pleased with that. In the aftermath of the incident, me and some other Dutch guild members went to her city to meet up with her friends from school. We attended the memorial setup in her school and put flowers at the scene of the crime on behalf of everyone she played the game with. When we met up with Maggie's school friends, we found out that William hadn't been half as nice as we thought he was. During the relationship, he had been very controlling of Maggie, and after the breakup, he began stalking her and sending her threatening text messages. She even went to the police to report it, but they told her that they couldn't do anything about it. After that, she met a different guy and started dating him. William found out, and well, took matters into his own hands. Thinking back on this, the worst part of it just came to mind. When we put flowers at the scene of the crime, we stood around for a few minutes contemplating on whether or not we should go up to the front door and personally give her mother our condolences, given that we all kinda knew her as well. We decided against it, given that we might unintentionally remind her mother that Maggie's online connections ultimately cost her her life. As soon as we got back to our car, we saw Maggie's front door open. Out of the door came her mother with Maggie's younger sister. I knew that Maggie had a younger sister, but I didn't know that she was only 6 or 7. I fucking lost it when I saw her little head hanging down while grabbing a hold of her mother, scared to go around the corner to face all the drawings and flowers people had left there. I found a very recent article that stated that William will most likely be spending 20 years in prison. Honestly, William, I fucking hope you never make it out of there.
There's always a reason to be afraid.